hadn't been back to Cape Town in 25 years. The last time I saw it was when I was 10. It was just after Mandela was sworn in as president. It was just my mom and me, living in a dingy 2-room semi-attached on the outskirts of Epping, an industrial area of Cape Town. Dad hadn't been around since I was born. We used to get a few wire transfers of money from him in England, but that stopped when I was about 4. Mom worked in an Epping soda bottling factory. On her afternoon break, she'd cycle over to my school, put me in the kiddie trailer on the back, and then pedal me off to Epping Playhouse Daycare Centre. Most of the ladies who worked in the factory sent their kids to the playhouse. Now it was 25 years later, and I stood in front of the building that once hosted the playhouse. It wasn't in operation anymore. The stucco bungalow was still the same blue colour it had been back then, but the paint was faded and peeling. The windows were covered in ugly plywood, and the door was nailed shut with crossboards. I shivered a little in the blistering sun, remembering my last days at the centre with little Quircy, my only friend. He was a boy of 7, who'd had some kind of bone disorder, and as a result he was very small for his age. Still, he had the brightest smile and the sweetest nature of all the kids at the playhouse. The 2 of us laboured happily in the sandbox outside the centre for hours, building an imaginary world of castles and kings. The playhouse wasn't a terrible place. The minders were, for the most part, kind and cheerful. But then there was old Willy, who worked in a large potting shed that occupied the other half of the bungalow. He specialised in hybridising and grafting plants for nurseries, seed companies and other customers who wanted their own custom designer plant, shrub or tree. His little business was called Willem's Speciality Growers, but he had an old peeling sign up on the back wall inside that read Purgatory Labs. He told kids that the bungalow used to be a government research facility during World War II, and that was its nickname. Old Willy didn't like us kids at all. We were too loud, even though we tried as hard as we could to be quiet. Some of us, though, would peek through the murky windows of the potting shed, trying to see what was going on in Purgatory Labs. Willy really hated that. He'd come outside steaming with rage. He tried to build a fence around his side to keep us out, with the big "trespassers will be prosecuted" sign, but the landlord wouldn't let him. Quircy was fascinated with the potting shed. I used to pull him away whenever he tried to look through the windows. We always avoided Willy's wrath, until one day, Quircy and I went inside the potting shed. We knew it was wrong, but the shed looked deserted and we thought Willy was away somewhere, calling on customers. We found the door unlocked, and the next thing you knew, we found old Willy snoring in a corner, stinking of whiskey. We both held our noses as we crept by him. Quircy almost giggled, but caught himself as I gave him a stern look to shut him up. He clammed up after that. We passed long rows of plants and shrubs in pots. Some of them looked really strange, like a flowering tree that had tri-coloured blooms on it, pink, white and blue. Then we came to a side wall where the peeling old Purgatory Labs sign was posted. Next to it was a door to another room. Of course, we had to open it up and go inside. The small room held a jungle of sorts, all mouldy and wet. There was moisture trickling down the plaster, Small greenish windows, also beaded with moisture, let in dim, sickly rays of sunlight. The potted plants in this room were much larger than the ones in the big main room. They loomed far above us and blocked most of the light out, making the room dark and shadowy. Some of the plants had long shoots or vines that clung to the walls and ceiling and were intertwined with other plants. Some resembled carnivorous plants, but much larger than I'd ever seen. They all looked weird, and some even malevolent, as if they had minds of their own. Kusi tugged on the bottom of my t-shirt. He told me he was scared and wanted to go. I agreed, and we quietly crept out. We turned around toward the door, and that's when I saw the biggest, nastiest looking plant of all. It was in a corner near the door, and we hadn't noticed it when we'd first come in. It gave off such an air of menace and deformity that I stopped dead in my tracks. It grew all the way to the ceiling and spilled out onto the floor as well. Big celery-like stalks sprouted thick, hairy vines. From some of the stalks hung several huge seed pods, or possible cocoons, wrapped all around in smaller vines, like a spider wraps a fly in its silk. We were trying to sneak by this hideous thing, hand in hand, like we were trying to go around a sleeping panther or a coiled snake. And then, quite suddenly, a ropey vine snaked out from the giant plant and grabbed Kusi by the ankle, wrapped itself around and around halfway up his little leg. Kusi let out the most awful screams. I squeezed his hand and began screaming too. I was so scared and I had no idea what to do. The door opened and old Willy burst in, red-faced and angry, murderously so. He roared curses at us. I didn't hear much of it, because I blacked out from fear, just as terrified by the sight of Willy as by the plant that had seized Kusi. When I woke up an hour later, I was on my afternoon nap cot outside the playhouse. My mom and Mrs. DeRuit, the manager of the playhouse, were hovering over me with worried faces. After I made them understand that I wasn't sick, I learned that Kusi was missing, and they wanted to know what had happened so they could find him. I told them about the grabby plant, but they dismissed it as childish foolishness. I told the same story to the police and scores of others. I was made to see therapists and child psychologists for years after the event. They all tried to convince me that the detail about the living plant had been a child's hallucination, perhaps a defense mechanism against the horror I felt over what I might have really witnessed of Kusi's disappearance. Rubbish. I saw what I saw. The police also questioned old Willy, of course, but he claimed he didn't know anything about Kusi's disappearance either. He swore that he'd left Kusi with me after I'd fainted. He said he'd gone round to the front of the bungalow to get Mrs. DeRuit. Kusi was gone when they returned to us. His story didn't change a whiff after endless repetitions. We looked for Kusi for months, Mom and I. We joined police search parties and helped put up flyers. Nothing panned out. Even after the fruitless official investigation ended, we carried on for a long time. I was devastated by the loss of my only friend. I prayed every night, hoping against hope that he would be found. I prayed for years, even after Mom and I left for Australia. As for old Willy, the police eventually had to let him go. They'd scoured every inch of the potting shed and his house too, but the only thing they discovered at all suspicious was a dog-eared flyer for a 4-year-old girl named Gussie, who disappeared in Epping 2 years before. The newspapers made a fuss about the discovery of the flyer, but there was no real evidence tying Willy to either of the disappearances. The case remained open, but Willy was a broken man. Everyone suspected him. The landlord cancelled the potting shed's lease. The last anyone from the playhouse ever saw of him was the day he came with a big truck to move most of his exotic plants and trees from the shed. Another grower took up his lease, but soon left, complaining that Willy had left some plants behind and that there was something wrong with them. 25 years later, trembling with fear and grief, I walked around to the back of the bungalow where the potting shed had been. There was one thing I had to do, even though I didn't really want to do it. I'd prayed all these years to know what happened to Kusi, and one day I'd had a sudden idea. An idea so powerful, I'd flown all the way from Sydney to check it out. The door of the potting shed was padlocked tight with a big iron chain, but the wooden door was quite rotted through, so I bashed out 2 lower panels, enough for me to crawl inside on all 4s if I kept my head down. I made my way to the room where that grotesque plant had stood in the corner near the door. The Purgatory Labs sign was still up, wearing 25 more years of fading. The plant was still there. It haunts my dreams to this day, but it was dead, fortunately. The stalks, vines and pods were brown and desiccated. I crunched a few dried vine leaves underfoot as I approached it gingerly, half expecting a tendril to grab me, just as it had done to poor Kusi. But no, the plant was dead, really dead. I had to touch it to prove it to myself. Trembling, I reached out to touch one of the pods. Part of its skin broke away under my prodding. Something fell out, fell through the hole in the skin. A mummified arm with a small child's golden bracelet around the skeletal wrist. My first thought was that it was Gussie's. My heart pounded with dread and anguish as I poked the skin of the other pods, until I found the one that contained my dear little Kusi.
The dead don't feel jealousy, do they? So there's a thicket of acolytes here. They all look at the point of shagging one another. I think I see Frankie by Georgia's grave. And for you, Georgia, what is this? Before the games, before the rope. Hello again, Georgia. I haven't forgotten you.